The unforgiving concrete of the alley was Arthur Vance's bed, the biting chill of the urban wind his constant companion. In his late 60s, a veteran of wars long past, he was now a ghost, haunting the bustling streets of a city that rushed past him, oblivious. He wasn't invisible, not truly, but the indifference of hurried passers-by rendered him so, their gazes skating over him as if he were just another part of the grimy backdrop. The pervasive indifference was a heavier burden than the cold, a constant reminder of his destitution. His routine was etched into the weary lines of his face. Waking before dawn, before the city truly stirred, the hollow ache in his stomach a familiar greeting. Then, the slow, methodical search for discarded cans and bottles in overflowing bins, each clink of glass a tiny, fragile hope for a few cents. He never shouted, never demanded, never accosted anyone. He simply held out a worn, calloused hand, his eyes deep-set and shadowed, reflecting a profound, unspoken weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. It was the weariness of a soul that had seen too much, lost too much, and was now forgotten. His frayed, thin coat, stained with years of neglect and the grime of the streets, offered little protection against the biting wind. Beneath it, his movements were stiff, hinting at aches and pains. Visible scars, faint white lines on his hands, were subtle whispers of a past life, a life of service that few, if any, now remembered or cared about. One particularly harsh morning, as the first gray light bled into the alley, a small, scruffy stray dog limped into his makeshift encampment. It was shivering violently, its ribs stark beneath matted fur, its eyes wide with a desperate hunger that mirrored Arthur's own. He had barely enough food for himself, a half-eaten sandwich he'd scavenged from a dumpster the previous night, now stale and cold. The thought of keeping it all, of satisfying just his own gnawing hunger, was a strong one. But looking at the dog, a profound wave of compassion washed over him, bypassing his own suffering. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his years, Arthur carefully broke off a piece of the sandwich. He held it out, slowly, gently, murmuring, "Here, little fella. Looks like we're in the same boat." The dog hesitated, its tail giving a tentative, almost imperceptible wag, before cautiously approaching and gobbling down the offering with frantic eagerness. As it finished, the dog looked up at Arthur, its eyes soft with gratitude, and gave his hand a grateful lick. It was the only act of kindness Arthur had received that day, a small, precious exchange that, for a fleeting moment, warmed the desolate chill within him. It showcased his profound compassion and resilience, even in the face of his own suffering. As Arthur shared his meager food, the dog, still nosing his hand, nudged a small, tarnished silver locket that had been hidden deep in the folds of his threadbare blanket. It clinked softly against the concrete. Arthur picked it up, his brow furrowing in confusion. It was an old family heirloom, intricately engraved with swirling patterns and initials he couldn't quite decipher in the dim light. One he thought he'd lost years ago. Its reappearance was uncanny. He flipped it open, the clasp stiff with age. Inside, faded but still visible beneath a thin layer of grime, was a tiny, sepia-toned photograph of a smiling young woman. Her features, even in the blurry image, were strikingly familiar, unsettlingly so. She bore a resemblance to someone from the city's prominent affluent district, a detail that briefly stirred a forgotten memory, a phantom limb of a past life, hinting at a connection to wealth or a very different existence. He closed the locket with a snap, the metal cold against his skin. It was a painful relic, a ghost from a life he could barely remember, a world that had long since abandoned him. He tucked it deep into his pocket, dismissing it as nothing more than a tormenting reminder of what was lost. Yet, the mystery of its sudden reappearance and the faint, nagging resemblance of the woman in the photograph to someone important lingered in the back of his mind. It was a tiny, unsettling seed planted in the fertile ground of his forgotten past, a subtle tremor before the coming earthquake. The morning after finding the locket, Arthur awoke to the familiar ache in his joints and the biting cold that seemed to seep into his very bones. He pulled his threadbare coat tighter, the worn fabric offering little comfort. The city was stirring around him, a cacophony of distant traffic and hurried footsteps. a world moving on without him. He was gathering his few meager belongings, preparing for another day of scavenging, when two figures loomed at the entrance to his alley. They were younger than him, stronger, and radiating an unsettling menace. One, a burly man with a shaved head and a sneer, cracked his knuckles. The other, lean and wiry, held a makeshift club. "Hey, old man," the burly one grunted, his voice rough. "This spot's taken. Heard you got comfortable here. Time to move on." Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. He recognized the type. Street predators, staking out territory, looking for easy targets. This wasn't a request. It was a demand, backed by the implicit threat of violence. He was old, weak, and tired of fighting. His first instinct, a deeply ingrained survival mechanism honed by years on the streets, was to simply give up his spot, to find another, even worse corner of the city, to vanish into a darker shadow. It was a familiar resignation, a surrender to the endless, grinding hardship of his existence. "I ain't bothering nobody," Arthur rasped, his voice hoarse from the cold and disuse. He tried to project a quiet dignity, hoping it might deter them. The burly man laughed, a cruel, mirthless sound. "Don't care. We're moving in. Get lost before things get rough." The wiry one kicked at Arthur's few meager belongings, his torn blanket, a plastic bag filled with cans, a dented tin cup, sending them scattering across the filthy pavement. The casual contempt, the deliberate desecration of his pathetic home, ignited something dormant within Arthur. His hand, almost unconsciously, brushed against the locket in his pocket. The cool metal felt like a sudden spark. He thought of the faded image inside, the smiling young woman, so vibrant even in sepia tones. A fleeting memory, sharp and poignant, flashed through his mind, a promise made long ago, to protect, to endure, to always fight for what was right. It wasn't a promise to himself, but to someone else, someone he had loved deeply. The indignity of this moment, of these men kicking at his last vestiges of humanity, wasn't just for him. It was for that promise, for that lost life. A surge of uncharacteristic anger, hot and fierce, coursed through him. Not a rage for himself, but for the profound unfairness of a life he never chose, a past he never deserved to lose. He felt the phantom pain of old wounds, not just physical, but deeper emotional scars that had never truly healed. He realized he was tired of being stepped on, tired of being invisible, tired of losing. He straightened his shoulders, a tremor of defiance running through him. "This is my spot," he stated, his voice gaining a surprising reedy strength. "I ain't moving." It was a foolish stand, he knew. He was no match for them physically. But the alternative, complete, utter surrender, felt far worse than any beating. This was his meager territory, his last stand for a shred of self-respect. Just as the burly man's fist clenched, preparing to strike, a sudden commotion from the main street drew their attention. A blaring siren cut through the urban hum, followed by the distinctive booming voice of a news anchor. The two men paused, their eyes darting towards the street, their predatory focus momentarily broken. Arthur looked too, his gaze drawn to a large outdoor screen mounted on the side of a building across the street, usually displaying advertisements. It was showing a live news report. On the screen, bathed in the bright, artificial glow of television lights, stood a woman of elegant poise and undeniable charisma, Eleanor Vance. She was renowned, a celebrated philanthropist, and the powerful CEO of a sprawling charity organization, her face a frequent fixture on society pages. Her hair was styled perfectly, her clothes impeccably tailored, exuding an aura of unimpeachable grace and success. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. He stared, transfixed. Her face was older, refined by wealth and influence, but there was no mistaking it. The high cheekbones, the delicate curve of her lips, the striking intensity in her eyes. They were undeniably the same as the young woman in the faded photograph from the locket now clutched in his pocket. It was his estranged daughter, whom he had believed had died years ago in a tragic, inexplicable accident that had shattered his life and ultimately left him adrift. The news segment continued, highlighting her recent public statements about honoring her family's legacy and her unwavering dedication to her late father's ideals. The reporter spoke glowingly of her philanthropy, her tireless work for various noble causes. Eleanor on screen nodded gravely, her eyes welling with what looked like genuine tears as she spoke of her beloved heroic father, a true inspiration whose memory drives all my endeavors. The words struck Arthur like a physical blow. His ideals? His memory? While he, her father, begged for food on the very streets of the city she so grandly claimed to serve, she was living a lavish life, built on a lie, a betrayal so profound it stole his breath. He was supposed to be dead. He was a ghost, erased from existence, while she paraded his legacy for public adoration and personal gain. The sight of his dead daughter, wealthy and lauded, speaking of his ideals, while he begged for food, shattered his fragile resignation. The indignity of the street, the threat from the bullies, all faded into insignificance before the crushing weight of this colossal deception. He couldn't retreat into anonymity any longer. He couldn't simply give up and fade away. The betrayal was too profound, the injustice too glaring. A burning need for answers, for justice, for truth, ignited deep within his weary soul. He was compelled to confront this living lie, to reclaim his lost life, and perhaps to find a form of justice he never dared to dream of. This was his point of no return. The air at the Benevolent Hearts Gala shimmered with the soft glow of chandeliers and the polite murmur of the city's elite. It was an exclusive affair, a carefully curated spectacle of philanthropy where wealth intertwined with social conscience, and reputations were polished to a blinding sheen. At the heart of it all was Eleanor Vance, radiant in an elegant gown, embodying the very essence of grace and generosity. She was a woman who commanded attention, her every gesture refined, her smile practiced and reassuring. Arthur, disguised only by the anonymity of his destitution and the careful chaos of a busy catering crew, managed to slip past the velvet ropes. His tattered coat, though out of place, somehow blended with the hurried movements of staff, briefly allowing him to be mistaken for a lost delivery man in the periphery. Eleanor stood on a raised dais, microphone in hand, delivering a heartfelt speech about family values and overcoming adversity, her voice modulated to convey both strength and vulnerability. She spoke movingly of her late heroic father and his enduring legacy, the very legacy she claimed to uphold through her charitable endeavors. Arthur, unseen, hidden amongst the bustling catering staff at the back of the ballroom, felt a cold surge of righteous indignation. Her words, so beautifully delivered, were a mockery, a grotesque distortion of his life, a monument built on lies. He moved through the throng, propelled by a desperate need for answers, for recognition, for the truth to shatter her perfect facade. His eyes, usually downcast, were fixed on her, burning with a quiet intensity. He reached the edge of the crowd, close enough that she might actually see him. Eleanor, mid-sentence, her gaze sweeping across the adoring faces, suddenly faltered. Her eyes, usually so confident, flickered, widened almost imperceptibly, then narrowed. A fleeting expression, a mix of confusion, then recognition, quickly masked by controlled horror, crossed her face. It was gone in an instant, replaced by her practiced smile. But Arthur saw it. He knew she recognized him. She smoothly continued her speech, her voice unwavering, but her eyes subtly signaled to a burly security guard near the stage. "I apologize, ladies and gentlemen," she announced, a hint of steel in her tone. "It seems we have a lost guest. Security, please ensure this gentleman is assisted out. He appears to be a bit confused." She dismissed him as a drunken vagrant, her words designed to publicly discredit him before he could speak, instructing security to remove him discreetly but firmly. As two uniformed security guards began to move towards him, their faces impassive, Arthur knew this was his only chance. He had to act. In a moment of desperate clarity, a memory, sharp and vivid, cut through the haze of his fragmented past. He remembered a cold night, long ago, in a foxhole, reciting a poem to a frightened young girl, a poem about enduring hope and unbroken promises. It was a military poem, one he had taught his daughter as a secret bedtime story, a code word for courage. Only they would know it, a bond forged in a different life. He drew a ragged breath, and before the guards could reach him, he spoke, his voice surprisingly strong, cutting through the genteel chatter of the gala. Though shadows lengthen and the dawn may creep, the silent sentinel his vigil keep. For promises unspoken, bonds untold, a heart of honor strong and true and bold. The words hung in the air, a stark, out-of-place declaration. This quote, delivered with surprising force and a raw emotional edge, was his unveiling, a subtle yet undeniable proof of his identity and a direct challenge to her carefully constructed facade. It was a phrase only his daughter, or someone intimately connected to his deepest memories, would recognize. Only Eleanor and one other person truly heard and understood the impact of those words. Seated discreetly at a table near the back, observing the gala with a keen, almost predatory focus, was Dr. Anya Sharma. She was a compassionate investigative journalist, renowned for her relentless pursuit of truth, her sharp mind specializing in exposing corruption and championing forgotten causes. She had been present at the gala, not for the glitz, but researching Eleanor's suspiciously rapid and seemingly unearned rise to power, sensing an anomaly beneath the polished surface. Dr. Sharma, with her keen eye for hidden truths and her finely tuned journalistic instincts, noticed Eleanor's extreme, almost imperceptible flinch at Arthur's words. She saw the quick, desperate masking of emotion, the rapid dispatch of security, and the cryptic, deeply personal nature of Arthur's desperate plea. Her curiosity was immediately piqued, her professional radar flashing red. Eleanor, momentarily stunned by the deeply personal nature of Arthur's words, hesitated, her smile freezing for a fraction of a second. That brief lapse was all Arthur needed. The guards, confused by the sudden poetic outburst, briefly faltered in their approach. Arthur used the moment, ducking past them and disappearing into a service corridor. Eleanor quickly regained her composure, forcing a bright smile back onto her face. "A truly spirited individual," she chuckled, her voice betraying a hint of strain. She smoothly transitioned back to her speech, continuing with an unnerving, forced sincerity about her late father's unwavering spirit. But the veneer was thin. Her hands, clasped elegantly before her, trembled almost imperceptibly. No sooner had she finished her speech than she discreetly pulled out her phone. Her voice dropped to a frantic whisper as she called her trusted, ruthless security chief, Mr. Harding. "He's here, Harding, the old man. He knows. He said the words." Her voice was tight with suppressed panic. "Find him, now. And he has a locket, a silver one. Retrieve it. It's crucial. Make sure he disappears. Permanently." The casual cruelty in her tone was chilling, revealing her complete lack of empathy. Her instructions clearly hinted at the true significance of the locket, a piece of evidence that could unravel her entire carefully constructed lie. She then made a series of frantic, whispered phone calls, not to the police, but to a shadowy, unseen figure, her words confirming her complicity in a long-buried secret concerning Arthur's supposed death and the illicit acquisition of his family's inheritance. The stakes had just been raised, from a desperate plea for recognition to a deadly game of cat and mouse, with Arthur's life and Eleanor's empire hanging in the balance. The vast, echoing archives of the local Veterans Affairs (VA) office hummed with a dry, dusty silence, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of paper or the distant clang of a filing cabinet. This sprawling, labyrinthine repository of countless lives and forgotten histories was where Arthur Vance now found himself, a phantom seeking to reclaim his own existence. He was guided by the quiet but resolute presence of Dr. Anya Sharma, who navigated the endless rows of towering shelves with a grim determination. This was the symbolic arena for Arthur's desperate fight, the very place where his official identity, his military service, his existence as a living man, had been meticulously, deliberately erased. To reclaim his past, he had to confront the bureaucratic behemoth that had swallowed him whole. Arthur was profoundly alone in this fight, despite Anya's invaluable presence. Dr. Sharma, with her sharp journalistic instincts, was a crucial ally, providing strategic guidance and relentless advocacy. She had used her connections to secure his entry into the notoriously difficult-to-access archives, but she couldn't directly intervene in the deeper, more insidious attempts to obstruct him. The VA bureaucracy itself was a formidable, impersonal opponent, a faceless entity of red tape and endless forms. Its sheer inertia was crushing, further complicated by the clandestine efforts of Eleanor's security chief, Mr. Harding. Harding, a master of backroom deals and intimidation, had bribed key VA personnel to obstruct Arthur at every turn, to lose files, to misdirect inquiries, to ensure that Arthur's records remained sealed and buried. Arthur felt the overwhelming weight of fighting not just an indifferent system, but a powerful hidden enemy that sought to keep him a ghost. His physical and mental endurance, already stretched to their absolute limits by years of homelessness, were now being pushed past the breaking point. Every step through the dusty aisles felt like a monumental effort, every conversation a draining battle. "They've moved your file again, Mr. Vance," a tired-looking VA clerk mumbled, barely making eye contact. "It should be in Section 7B, but it's not. Perhaps it was misfiled in the annex records from the early 2000s, or perhaps digitized." The vague answers, the endless referrals, the casual incompetence. It was all part of Harding's deliberate obfuscation. The pressure mounted with every passing minute. Eleanor Vance was scheduled to make a major public announcement the following day, a calculated, audacious move to solidify her family legacy narrative. She planned to launch a new, prominent charity in Arthur's honor, a grand gesture designed to cement her image as a grieving, dutiful daughter, and ensure no one would ever question her past or her fortune. This would irrevocably seal Arthur's fate as a ghost, a dead hero whose memory she could manipulate at will, if he failed to emerge with irrefutable proof before then. Anya, ever vigilant, checked her watch. "Arthur, we're losing time. If she makes that announcement, it'll be impossible to undo the narrative. We need something concrete, something undeniable, by tomorrow morning." The danger was also escalating. Mr. Harding, knowing that Arthur was attempting to access his records, the very records that could expose Eleanor's monumental fraud, had activated his network of street informants and hired thugs. He had given them a tight deadline: find Arthur and ensure he vanishes before he could retrieve any documents. The city was a vast hostile hunting ground, and Arthur, the prey. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every unexpected sound sent a jolt of fear through his weary body. The clock was ticking down, not just on his vindication and the potential for justice, but on his very survival. Arthur felt the cold dread twist in his stomach. He was old, alone, and pursued. Yet the memory of Eleanor's smug face at the gala, her callous dismissal, her lies echoing through the opulent hall, ignited a stubborn flame within him. He thought of the locket, the faded picture of his young daughter, now warped by betrayal. He couldn't let her win. Not like this. "Annex records," Arthur rasped, remembering the clerk's vague suggestion. He knew those sections were rarely visited, often poorly organized. A perfect place to hide something. With Anya by his side, he trudged towards a dusty, forgotten corner of the archives, rows of metal shelves stretching into the gloom like ancient tombs. The air here was even colder, heavy with the scent of decaying paper and forgotten lives. He ran his hand along the spines of countless anonymous folders, his fingers aching, his eyes blurring from fatigue and the effort to focus. Anya, recognizing his growing exhaustion, spoke softly. "Arthur, you don't have to do this alone. Let me try. I can call in some favors, get someone else to look." Arthur shook his head, his gaze fixed on the shelves. "No, this is my fight, my truth. It has to be me." He felt the overwhelming weight of battling a powerful, hidden enemy and an indifferent system, but also a fierce, protective instinct for the truth. He was physically and mentally drained, yet an unyielding determination propelled him forward. He was a veteran, and he knew how to endure. He pulled out several heavy boxes, dust motes dancing in the faint light filtering from a distant window. He coughed, his lungs burning. Each file was a dead end. Then, as he reached for one last box on a high shelf, his fingers brushed against a thin, worn folder tucked precariously behind a stack of much larger ones. It bore a faded, handwritten label, Vance, A, classified. A jolt went through him. This was it. This felt different. He pulled it out, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, among old photographs and forgotten correspondence, was a set of official military records, marked Restricted, Deceased. And within those, a detailed medical report, complete with his unique service number, and, crucially, a record of a rare specific combat injury he'd sustained decades ago, detailing the precise, identifiable genetic markers and blood type associated with it. This was irrefutable scientific proof of his identity, and beneath that, a crumpled, decades-old military commendation letter signed by a high-ranking officer praising his unyielding courage and dedication to family. The words, once a source of pride, now held a devastating double meaning, a cruel irony in light of his daughter's betrayal. He gripped the folder, a wave of triumph, raw and potent, surging through him. He had found it. He had found his life. But as he turned to show Anya, a sudden sharp crack echoed from the entrance of the annex. A shadow fell across the dusty aisle. Mr. Harding, his face a mask of cold fury, stood there, flanked by two burly thugs. They had found him. The gauntlet wasn't over. It had just begun. The triumphant glint of the silver locket in Arthur's hand was short-lived. As he turned, clutching the dusty folder that contained his rediscovered life, the menacing shadows of Mr. Harding and his two hulking thugs loomed at the entrance of the VA archives. Their faces were grim, their intentions clear. The air, already thick with dust, suddenly crackled with a palpable tension. "Give us the documents, old man," Harding snarled, his voice a low growl. "And this can be easy." Arthur's heart pounded, a frantic drum against his ribs. He knew he couldn't fight them physically, but he had retrieved his truth, and he wouldn't surrender it. He clutched the folder tighter, his eyes darting, assessing the dimly lit, labyrinthine stacks around them. Years of combat training, long dormant beneath layers of despair and destitution, flickered to life. He wasn't a young soldier anymore, but the instincts of a veteran, the honed ability to survive against overwhelming odds, remained. The thugs lunged. Arthur, despite his age, moved with a surprising, almost desperate agility. He didn't engage in a direct fight. He evaded, ducking under a reaching arm, sidestepping a heavy blow. He used the environment to his advantage, weaving through the narrow aisles of shelves, pulling out dusty, heavy boxes to create obstacles, sending them clattering to the floor to disorient his pursuers. He disarmed one thug with a swift, almost unconscious motion, twisting a wrist and sending a makeshift weapon clattering. He remembered the feeling of adrenaline, of focused survival. He moved towards a back exit he'd noticed, a fire escape leading down to a forgotten alley behind the building. As he scrambled over a low cart of archival boxes, Mr. Harding, surprisingly quick, lunged and snatched at the folder. A desperate tug-of-war ensued. The folder ripped, and the precious documents spilled. Arthur felt a surge of despair as the pages scattered across the grimy concrete floor. But in his frantic grab, he managed to secure two critical items: a crumpled, decades-old medical report detailing a unique, rare injury he sustained in combat, an injury with specific blood type and genetic markers associated with it, irrefutable, scientific proof of his identity. And clinging to his fingers, a faded, slightly water-damaged military commendation letter signed by a high-ranking officer, praising his unyielding courage and dedication to family. The words, once a source of pride, now held a devastating, ironic double meaning in light of his daughter's profound betrayal. Arthur shoved the documents into his tattered coat pocket, the silver locket still clutched in his hand. He kicked a stack of unstable boxes, sending them crashing down, creating a temporary barrier. Harding roared in frustration, but Arthur didn't look back. He burst through the emergency exit, clanging heavily behind him, and raced down the rusty fire escape, his old bones protesting with every jarring step. His destination, the bustling outdoor plaza of the city hall, where Eleanor Vance was making her grand announcement. He could hear the faint murmur of a crowd, the bright, almost deafening blare of news cameras. He pushed through the throngs of bewildered tourists and hurried commuters, his heart pounding, a burning determination overriding his physical exhaustion. He was spotted. Mr. Harding, having taken the stairs, emerged from the alleyway, his eyes fixed on Arthur. The plaza was packed. A massive LED screen displayed Eleanor, bathed in the media's glow, her face composed and tearful, speaking eloquently of her late, heroic father, of his unwavering spirit, and of the new charity being launched in his honor. A large commemorative plaque, shrouded in a velvet cloth, waited for its unveiling. Just as she prepared to dramatically pull the cloth away, revealing his deceased name, Arthur burst through the last line of the crowd, emerging into the open space directly in front of the stage. He was disheveled, panting, but undeniably alive, the silver locket glinting in his hand. He heard Harding's furious shout, felt a hand clamp onto his shoulder. A thug. Arthur, with a last surge of desperate energy, spun around, wrenching free. He stumbled, falling to one knee. The documents, loose in his pocket, flew out, scattering across the polished stone of the plaza, some fluttering towards the stage. For a split second, it seemed he'd lost. His proof scattered to the wind, his chance gone, his desperate journey ending in failure. This was the bated breath moment, where all hope seemed to evaporate into the indifferent city air. But then, a blur of motion. Dr. Anya Sharma, having anticipated Arthur's bold move, had strategically positioned herself near the stage, armed with her own camera crew and a live news feed. She saw the commotion, saw Arthur fall, and her keen journalist's eye immediately spotted the distinct military insignia on the crumpled commendation letter, the archaic VA seal on the medical report. She knew what they were. Without hesitation, she raced forward, a determined glint in her eyes, oblivious to the jostling crowd and the shouts. She scooped up the scattered documents, her fingers surprisingly nimble, and thrust them, still fanned out, into the hands of a bewildered live TV reporter, whose microphone was already broadcasting. The reporter, initially startled by the sudden appearance of the disheveled veteran and the aggressive journalist, quickly processed the visual. He began to read aloud, live on air, excerpts from the medical report, detailing the unique injury, the blood type, the undeniable markers. Then, he read from the commendation letter, the words of courage and dedication now echoing with a devastating public irony. On the massive LED screen, Eleanor Vance's face, mid-sentence about "my father's enduring legacy," visibly contorted. Her eyes widened, seeing Arthur, disheveled but undeniably alive, holding the locket, his gaze burning with accusation. She saw the documents in the reporter's hand, saw them being read on the very broadcast meant to immortalize her lie. Her meticulously crafted facade cracked, shattered into a million pieces before the eyes of the entire world. The audience, initially confused by the sudden interruption, hushed into a stunned collective silence. Then a collective gasp rippled through the plaza as the horrifying, undeniable truth hit them. The live broadcast, now chaotic, cut between Eleanor's horrified, crumbling face, Arthur's resolute, weary stare, and the shocking documents being displayed, their contents read aloud. The narrative of her virtuous legacy collapsed, replaced by the undeniable reality of her monumental deceit. Then a slow, building swell of sound. Cheers. They erupted for Arthur, a wave of recognition, of profound admiration and righteous anger washing over the crowd. They surged forward, no longer an indifferent mass but a collective consciousness, now fully aware of the terrible truth. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and the story of the forgotten veteran and the shocking betrayal of his daughter exploded across every screen, a moment of profound public vindication. The plaza erupted into a chaotic tableau of flashing cameras, shouting reporters, and the urgent blare of sirens. Eleanor Vance, her face a mask of disbelief and horror, was immediately arrested on live television. The carefully constructed facade of her public persona crumbled to dust as police officers, acting on information provided by Dr. Sharma and spurred by the irrefutable evidence of Arthur's documents, led her away in handcuffs. She faced a litany of charges, including fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy related to Arthur's disappearance and her illicit acquisition of his inheritance. The investigation that followed was swift and merciless. It uncovered Eleanor's long-running, elaborate scheme. Capitalizing on Arthur's combat injury and subsequent disorientation, she had orchestrated his death years ago, leveraging his presumed demise to gain control of a significant family trust. A substantial fortune inherited from Arthur's side of the family, a detail he had been too traumatized and distant to recall. Her Benevolent Hearts Foundation was exposed as nothing more than a sophisticated money laundering operation, built entirely on lies and ill-gotten wealth. Eleanor Vance lost everything: her freedom, her vast fortune, and her meticulously cultivated reputation. She became a damning symbol of betrayal and corruption, her name forever synonymous with deceit. Mr. Harding, her ruthless security chief, was also swiftly apprehended, implicated in multiple acts of obstruction, intimidation, and assault. His dark reign of enforcing Eleanor's will came to an abrupt end. For Arthur Vance, the initial shock of vindication slowly gave way to a profound, almost overwhelming sense of relief. The whirlwind of media attention eventually subsided, leaving behind a quiet, burgeoning sense of peace. He was unequivocally proven alive, his true identity restored. His long-lost veteran benefits, including decades of back pay, were reinstated, and the substantial family trust that Eleanor had stolen was finally returned to its rightful owner. But Arthur, having endured years of destitution and betrayal, had no interest in personal luxury. His newfound resources were not for opulent living, they were for a far more meaningful purpose. He chose to dedicate his reclaimed life to others who had suffered as he had. Within months, he established the Veterans Haven Foundation. Its mission was simple yet profound: to provide immediate housing, comprehensive mental health support, and robust rehabilitation services for homeless veterans across the country. He personally oversaw the acquisition of old, disused buildings, transforming them into warm, welcoming sanctuaries. He hired compassionate staff, including therapists and social workers, ensuring that no other veteran would fall through the cracks, lost and forgotten like he once was. This endeavor gave his life a purpose far beyond mere survival. It fulfilled a long-dormant desire to help his comrades, to ensure their sacrifices were never forgotten, and to provide them with the dignity and support they deserved. Weeks later, a quiet, almost serene afternoon found Arthur sitting with Dr. Anya Sharma in a newly furnished office at the nascent Veterans Haven Foundation. The room was simple but warm, sunlight streaming through a large window, illuminating newly painted walls and sturdy, comfortable furniture. It was a stark, comforting contrast to the grimy alleyway he had called home for so long. "I never thought I'd see this day, Anya," Arthur mused, his gaze drifting out the window to the bustling street below, now seen with a new sense of belonging. "For so long I was just a ghost, a forgotten man." Dr. Sharma, now a close confidant and an active, dedicated board member of the foundation, smiled softly. Her journalistic career had taken a new turn, her focus now deeply intertwined with advocacy. "You were never truly forgotten, Arthur," she replied, her voice gentle yet firm. "You just needed someone to see your truth. And you fought for it, even when you had nothing left to give. Your story, your incredible resilience, will inspire countless others. You didn't just reclaim your life, you gave hope to so many who felt utterly lost." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small silver locket. It was no longer tarnished or dull. Anya had taken it to a jeweler, having it meticulously cleaned and polished. It gleamed in the afternoon light, its intricate engravings now clear and beautiful. "This was your anchor, wasn't it?" she asked, holding it out. Arthur took it, the cool, smooth metal a comforting weight in his hand. He flipped it open, looking at the faded photograph of the young Eleanor. A faint, peaceful smile touched his lips, devoid of bitterness. "It was," he confirmed, his voice a soft whisper. "It reminded me who I was. It reminded me of the promises I made. It reminded me that even when I had nothing else, I still had my truth. And that, Anya," he added, looking at her, his eyes shining with a profound gratitude, "that was everything." His journey, once marked by suffering, was now illuminated by purpose, a testament to the enduring power of kindness and the unwavering pursuit of justice. The once familiar bitterness of the urban wind no longer carried the sting of indifference for Arthur Vance. Now in his early 70s, his frame was frailer, but his spirit was vibrant, his eyes alight with a profound sense of peace and purpose. Willow Creek, once a backdrop for his despair, had become a thriving testament to his enduring compassion. The Veterans Haven Foundation, which he had painstakingly brought to life, had flourished beyond his wildest dreams. It was no longer a nascent project, but a national model, with bustling branches in several major cities across the country, providing comprehensive support to thousands of formerly homeless veterans. Arthur, though no longer directly managing the daily operations, remained the haven's guiding spirit. He was a beloved fixture, often seen walking through the communal spaces, his presence a quiet anchor for those still navigating their own paths to recovery. He would sit with young veterans, his gnarled hands gripping a warm mug, sharing stories of his own struggles and triumphs. His words were always gentle, always encouraging, carrying the weight of lived experience and the light of hard-won hope. His life, once defined by loss, was now overflowing with purpose, camaraderie, and the profound satisfaction of truly making a difference. He was honored as a hero, not just for his military service, but for his enduring compassion and his unwavering fight for justice, a justice that had extended far beyond his own personal vindication. Arthur dedicated his twilight years to ensuring that no other veteran would suffer his fate. He became a passionate advocate for veteran rights on a national level, his voice, once hoarse from the streets, now clear and resonant as he testified before Congress. He spoke eloquently and movingly about the systemic issues leading to homelessness among service members, pushing for policy changes that prioritized support over neglect. He didn't just speak, he acted. Collaborating closely with Dr. Anya Sharma, his steadfast ally, he co-authored a memoir titled The Locket's Promise. The book, a raw and poignant account of his life, from his wartime experiences to his years of destitution and ultimate reclamation, became an unexpected bestseller. It resonated deeply with readers across the nation, inspiring widespread empathy for homeless veterans and driving significant, tangible policy changes within the VA system and government funding allocations. Crucially, a significant portion of the book's proceeds went directly back to the Veterans Haven Foundation, ensuring its long-term sustainability and continued expansion. The story culminates on a warm, golden afternoon in the sun-drenched garden of the main Veterans Haven facility in Willow Creek. The garden, meticulously tended by the residents themselves, was a vibrant oasis of calm, alive with the buzzing of bees and the soft murmur of conversations. Arthur sat on a rustic wooden bench, bathed in the soft glow of the late afternoon light, surrounded by a group of young, formerly homeless veterans. They listened intently, their faces reflecting a mixture of respect and quiet hope, as he shared a story from his early days in the service, his voice a gentle hum. These young men and women, once adrift and suffering, were now thriving and healthy, their eyes holding the promise of new beginnings, a testament to the Haven's transformative power. In his hand, Arthur held the polished silver locket. Its surface, gleaming under the sun, reflected the verdant hues of the garden. He opened it, revealing the faded photograph of the young Eleanor. Once a symbol of profound pain and devastating betrayal, it had transformed. It was now a quiet, powerful reminder of his journey, of the darkness he had faced, and of the profound triumph he had achieved. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a quiet affirmation that even from the depths of despair, new life and purpose could emerge. A gentle breeze rustled through the leaves of the ancient oak tree overhead, carrying the faint, joyful sound of laughter from within the Haven's communal living spaces. The collective sound of lives being rebuilt, of hope rekindled. Arthur looked up, his aged eyes crinkling at the corners, gleaming with a quiet, enduring hope and an unbreakable spirit. The veteran, once ignored and discarded by the world, had not only reclaimed his own life, but had become a beacon of light for countless others. His act of kindness, born from a shared moment with a hungry stray, had indeed led to a shocking discovery, and ultimately, to a legacy of profound compassion that continued to touch lives, echoing through the revitalized heart of the city he now truly called home. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies, and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming narratives that delve into the profound human spirit and the power of unseen heroes. Thank you for joining our journey.